culturally appropriate a rain dance, baby? Are you gonna culturally appropriate a rain dance? Because I don't know if I should be offended, because I had a cousin and I think he was a Cherokee, and I don't know if that entitles me, but I know that you can't do it. I'm pretty sure you shouldn't do it, and I know the drought makes you wanna go through with it. I just don't know anymore. Please let it pour, so we don't have to make these decisions anymore. Hey everybody, good afternoon, or good evening for some of you, good morning for others of you. Morning, good afternoon, good evening, and if I don't see you later, good night. Nice to see you all again. Anyhow, Alan says it's not raining. Yeah, it hasn't been raining here either. I walked around for about an hour this morning, and I dragged the hose around. I dragged that hose all over the garden. That's the way to do it, I'll tell you what. I've been getting a little bit of a cold. And so I was thinking, I should go out and soak up some vitamin D. And I could water the garden at the same time. So, fortunately my neighbors are not that close. I'll just not say anything else about that. But I did get out there and I watered all this stuff. And it's kind of fun when you go out and you start watering your garden. And you discover things. You're like, oh, look at that. Those things are coming up. Cool. Look at that. The amaranth is sprouting. Look at that. Something's been chewing on that broccoli. I better harvest that. Man, there's more tomatoes under here than I thought. Holy moly, look at that. We've got eggplant. The milkmaid says, my favorite with dragging a hose is trying not to knock over plants. Yeah, there's a reason. At one point, I stuck pieces of rebar with little pieces of PVC over them on one of my old gardens, so I could drag the hose around, and it would pull against the PVC. The problem is it often spun the PVC up, and then it would drag against the rebar, and that's kind of rough. But it is what it is. I usually have a child follow me out to the garden. Most of the time, there's kids out there anyways, because they grow their own vegetables, and they like to go out there and pick, and they're often watching the baby. She's 1.5 years old, and she loves to go out there in the garden and eat berries and bits of vegetables. She likes to break the tops off of the onions and chew on them. And so there's usually a child out there. She gets watched during the day while mommy is doing homeschool with the other kids. So kids are always taking her out to the garden and then go see the chickens and then back inside and then go play around the swing and then go, it's like around and around and around. And so, there's usually a child out there where I could say, hey, buddy, would you stand down at the end and just make sure that daddy doesn't destroy those marigolds, trying to drag it around the edge of the row. And I found if I walk down the grocery row gardens, there's that nice 3-foot path. If I can get 2/3 of the way down, I could water the whole thing, and I'll water both sides. And I'll walk back down, and I have 6 of them, so I've got to do 3 alleys. It's not that big a deal. So I want to say hello to everybody: Vivian and Alan and Marcus and Scott and Philip and the milkmaid and Tina. My life's journey, Sharon. Thank you for saying that. Some people are like, would you please stop singing? And then I banned them from my channel. So it's good you said the right thing. I'm just kidding. Who been? Paulo, hello in Brazil. Hello, Brazil. Noel, Texas farmer. AA home gardening. Brett. Where do I get my energy from? Well, right now I'm drinking peppermint tea. South of the Sticks. How you doing? Hey, Rosa. Hey, Bad Drivers of Columbus, Georgia. Hey, Homestead Healthy. All right, so I'm going to start answering questions right from the beginning. And we'll see if we could set them to music, because obviously that would be the rational and reasonable way to do it. Vivian writes, I have white dots on every plant in my garden. Corn, pumpkin, peppers, tomatoes, cabbage. I can't find any bugs or caterpillars. Does not look like blight. Could it be overspray from some sort of weed killer? It's possible. There was a time when I killed a rooster, and it got a little messy and the blood flew over a garden bed. And the little dots burned some of the leaves, and it looked like little brownish spots. There's more than one option, though. You know, if there was something very highly nitrogenous that could burn, it's possible. If it is an overspray, that's also possible. It's also possible that something is chewing in small amounts and jumping away. There's a tiny little bug that shows up in my gardens. They look like itty bitty grasshoppers, and I was starting to think they might be flea beetles, but they were not flea beetles, 'cause they don't look like them, but they're similar in size. So I look, and I asked a bunch of people, I said, what's this little thing that's chewing up all my leaves and leaving brown spots on all of them? And people were like, we don't know what it is. We don't know what it is. And so basically I've been in the dark. But I went out there and I sprayed everything with spinosad, which is apparently approved for organic usage. And it seemed to knock them back. But they were itty bitty. We're talking itty bitty, like pinhead size. And they jump from leaf to leaf, and they're very good at hiding. So that's a possibility as well. I keep my eyes open. If it's herbicide damage, it'll go away. But if it's a bug, it'll keep coming back every day. It's probably gonna keep spreading. And if it keeps spreading, you'd better be heading it off. Heading it off. There, that's probably enough of that song. I was kind of getting tired of that one. But anyhow, I hope that helps, Sophia. Marcus says, how close is too close when planting? I have a small yard. Oh my gosh, that is one of my favorite questions in the whole world. You can't get too close, man. Plants are total extroverts. Just stack them on top of each other and they'll have a party. No, that's not true. Don't do that. If you have plants, the closer you plant the plants, the more fertile your soil needs to be, and the more you need to take care of them, and the more water they're going to need. Okay, so if you read John Jeevan's How to Grow More Vegetables, Fruits, Nuts, whatever, in less space than you ever thought possible, you'll see that he has these little beds. And it's in Southern California, so there's rich soil. But it's double dug, 5 foot wide. Things are planted really tight in these little hexagon spacing. And they give you this crazy, like these yields are like super, super high. But I was watching the video that they did from their farm. And you know how often they water? Twice a day. Twice a day. And they add a good bit of compost to those beds. Every time they turn them over, they put compost in there. And they have to grow a lot of compost. And that's a lot of watering twice a day. They need it too. You'll see when things get really close together, they just don't develop to their capacity. So you think, hey, if I planted more stuff together, I'm going to get more yield. But there's a limiting, it's only so close you can go before it's like, oh shoot, that was wrong. If you plant a bunch of turnips together, for example, you've got a turnip every inch. You'll sometimes get a few big turnips in the mix and a whole bunch of little itty bitty starving ones. You ever seen like when you get a cluster of plants coming up together and they're itty bitty, but then you go in there with a pair of scissors and you cut all of them but one, and that one remaining plant, shoot, it's like 3 times as big within a week? It's because of the root competition. They're competing for resources. So even if you have a small amount of space, I wouldn't plant things too close. You could go a little closer if your soil is rich and if you're willing to water it regularly and take good care of it. But generally, the spacings on seed packets are pretty decent. But I usually add a half sometimes to the spacings that they they add, like, if they say to plant at 2 foot, I might go 2.5 foot even, or 3 foot, because I don't want to, if it's dry out, I'm gonna have to drag the hose more, and my soil is very infertile. So, planting my cabbages at 3 foot apart, I got a yield of cabbages. Planting the potatoes at 3 feet, I could have planted them further apart in the rows, and I really should have. Philip says, David, would you make a playlist of all your original music? I need to do that at some point. Yes. I should have somebody else do it for me, because I'm always saying, I should probably do that, and then I'm not doing it, because I'm trying to produce the next gardening video. Let's see. Marcus Aurelius says, how well does the tobacco leaf brew work for which pests and at which concentration? I make it pretty strong, and I add a little soap to it too, so it sticks. And it seems to knock out aphids well. It knocks out some caterpillars, some beetles. It's, you really got to just try it. And I didn't spray it on everything. I primarily used it to get rid of aphid infestations. But the problem with the tobacco thing is you can't really do it on, you don't want to do it on members of the same family, Solanaceae family. So you wouldn't want to use it to knock out a problem on your, say, potatoes or tomatoes, because you don't want to potentially carry over a virus from the tobacco. Lovecat says, hello, everyone. Big heart. It never rains here. LOL. I'm sorry to hear that. But I guess if it never rains, you don't get caught up in false hope, That's good. I mean, that counts for something. Yeah, it's not gonna rain. I'm not gonna have any hope at all. It's great. I feel great. I mean, it's sort of freeing. Holy moly. Huben says, any suggestions on preventing beetles and other insects from decapitating my pumpkins? Lost 5 of them last night. The best thing that I did was I took soup cans, like with the top off of each side of it, and hammered them around the baby pumpkins when they're small. When they get bigger, they can shrug off a bite. When they're brand new, they can't. You can also use toilet paper rolls. You can also use little pieces of PVC. Anything you can make a ring out of to put around the base. And also, if they're planted with a bunch of mulch around them, pull the mulch back and then put that ring there, because sometimes those things live in the mulch. And then just tap that can into the ground a little bit, and they'll grow. And usually that stops the problem. I think I missed a question here. I want to make sure that I... Oh, yes. South of the Sticks says, I have mice in my compost. Is this a problem? No, it's not really a problem. I mean, it feeds the local cats. The mice will chew the compost up. The mice will manure it for you. But the mice can be a problem. They can become a pest, and they can end up in your house and that sort of thing. And in that case, you can always fork all that compost out, and then, make sure that it's critter proof. You've got to critter proof your compost pile. The best one I had was this gigantic galvanized thing. I called it the continuous compost digester. It was this big galvanized casing that had been for an air conditioner unit or something. It was huge. It was like 4 foot by 4 foot by maybe 4 foot tall. It was like this giant thing, and nothing could climb into it. Like the rats and stuff didn't get into it because I couldn't climb up the sides, and the dogs couldn't reach into it either. And the second best one I had was the one that I made out of concrete. That was really good. Again, it was a wall system where things could not get in or out or underneath it. But generally, no, the mice aren't really a problem. They're not going to ruin your compost. As a matter of fact, they'll speed it up because they're in there chewing things and turning it over for you. Let's see. Trying to get here. I'm going to answer John because he sent a super chat here. So you're at top of the list, John. John Slaymaker sends a super chat and says, how is the Terra Preta project coming along? I just made a bunch of biochar and I'm grinding up broken clay pots. Yes, John! Zone 17, Bay Area of North California. Man, that is so cool. I don't know what Zone 17 is, though. Is that a new zone? Because I didn't think that California got that high. Maybe Zone 7? Unless it's a different, maybe Sunset Zone, not Hardiness Zone. But anyhow, so far so good. It looks really good, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it looks after I pull these plants out of it. You know, when these tomatoes and broccoli give up in that bed, I mean, they're massive. The stems are like this big on the tomatoes. They're huge. And they're just sprawling sideways. I can't even hardly keep them tied up. They're pulling the trellis down. They're so heavy and thick and loaded with tomatoes. It's awesome. It obviously is working. But I'm really going to know what it looks like when we plant on it a couple more times. You know, when we get to a fall crop and maybe I clear it out and I plant carrots, we'll see what that does. We have to see, you know, how it goes from plant to plant over time. But so far, so good. And please keep me apprised on how yours goes. I'm still making biochar. I'm convinced enough that this is awesome that as my beds get emptied out, I'm going to be doing this to some of them. Let's see. Pardon me, I'm a little congested today. I feel like in the microphone. That's not very nice. I'm sorry. Hello, Denmark. Ice Anholm. Hello, Kim from Maryland. Baltimore. It's got to be a nice spring weather up there right now. My sister's up that way. One of my sisters. Texas Farmer says, would you eat a volunteer squash from a fresh compost pile? Absolutely. I have squash growing out of my compost right now, and it looks great. Noel says, what chicken breeds have you? Some look like Buff Orpingtons, some like Rhode Island crosses. Yeah, very good eye. I've got Buff Orpingtons. I've got a Rhode Island cross that's called Production Red. And I have some California Whites, which are a cross with White Leghorns. It's supposed to be very productive. And then I have some Brown Leghorns, which are very pretty, kind of a wild-looking bird. Very good foragers. Let me see here. I want to make sure that okay. Trying to scan through this thing here. Rose says, how long are dry bean seeds viable for? That's a very good question. The two things that take out the viability of plants, humidity and heat. Those two are the killers right there. So if you have beans in a highly humid, warm environment, they could fail in months. They can lose their germination. I know this because I had a bunch of seeds when I was in Grenada, and the relative humidity is 80-something degrees. We had no air conditioning. The temperature inside of the house was in the 80s, relative humidity in the 80s as well. And I saved beans from a variety that I wanted to grow the next year, and they did not sprout like 6 months later. I just had them at room temperature sitting there. I was like, I should plant those things. Now, I have had beans inside of my house with air conditioning. You know, houses in the 70s, air is moderately dry. And they, you know, they'll keep for a year at room temperature, no problem. They keep longer if you stick them in the fridge. If you keep them in the fridge, especially if you throw a little packet of silica gel in with them to dry out, take some of the moisture out, they'll go. They will go. And they'll last a lot longer. So if you were to really dry those beans down and put them in a freezer, you could probably keep them a decade or more and they'd still sprout. But if they're not dry enough when they go into the freezer, they'll die because the water inside of the embryo will damage it. Zombie Garden said, found a drowned mouse in a bucket. Oh yeah. That sounds like a ska song. Let's see. Well, I found a drowned mouse in a bucket. Should I bury it into my soil? Found a drowned mouse in a bucket. Should I bury it in my soil? Yes, I think that you should go and bury that thing. You should bury that thing. And you should plant a pumpkin on on top of its corpse. Put a pumpkin on the corpse of a drowned mouse in a bucket buried in your soul. I said put a pumpkin on the corpse of a buried mouse drowned in a bucket in your soil. I think that's pretty close. The 2 questions at the same time. Does A.T. Claremont says, does Seminal pumpkin taste like a type of squash or a regular pumpkin? You know, it tastes very similar to a butternut squash, but a little less sweet, maybe a little heartier. It's actually similar to a sweet potato as well. Very good. Has a little bit of a nutty flavor to it. It's not quite as sweet as a butternut, but it's got a good, hearty, full flavor. Hey, Scott. Nice to see you. Yes, Scott agrees. Compost that mouse. Yeah. Bury it in your soil. Yeah. Yeah. What is my favorite nitrogen plant for a colder climate? Oh, if I could. There are actually 2. If I could grow them, I would grow alfalfa and I would grow Siberian pea shrub. Those 2 I've always wanted to grow, and I've never lived in the proper climate for either. But alfalfa and Siberian pea shrub would be my favorites. Bill Wiggy says, I got termites and ants fighting over my compost pile. That sounds like a good fight. They're going to work it over for you. Gardner Earth Guy says, my Terra Preta scene is producing lemon, cucumber, yellow squash, and melons. It seems to hold calcium much better in the Panhandle. I'm down the rabbit hole. Hey, I love it. Send me photos. I would love to see photos. I will share them. My email is david@floridafoodforests.com. I would love to see that. That sounds fantastic. Good work. I'm definitely down the rabbit hole, too. Laura says, question. I cut my freeze-damaged papaya down to 2 feet tall this spring, and now it's sprouting from 3 places on the stump. David, should I prune it to just 1 sprout or leave them all? I'd probably leave them all. Those things are so subject to rot when they get cut back and everything. I'd probably just leave them all. Every time you cut it, it's like there's more chance that it's going to rot down into the trunk. Okay, Rose, go ahead and get rid of your in-laws. No, I didn't say that. Hey, in-laws. Hey, Rose. I love my in-laws. In-laws are great. In-laws are the best. Amazing. They're amazing. Apothecary Custom says, I have a starfruit tree that hasn't grown in 3 years. When planting it, I had mixed in some black cow manure. About 8 months later, stack added about 8 inches of wood chips with still no growth. What should I do? That's a good question. Have you seen any leaf damage on it? As in, does it start to get smaller toward the top, and did the leaves curl? Were there any weird curling or weird growth or discoloration spots, that sort of thing on it? Because if that black cow had aminopyrrolid in it, it could have infected the tree, and that tree is probably never ever going to grow. 3 years is a very long time for a starfruit not to grow. My guess is that the manure contained some aminopyrrolids and it stunted the growth. I had that happen with multiple fruit trees, some blackberries and pecans, and they never did anything. 5 years went by and they still barely had a little bit of green growth on them, and they just sat there. And eventually some of them died and some of them I got rid of. But it's like they're just in this limbo where they can't grow anymore because they've been infected with this stuff. A starfruit tree should easily grow 3 to 4 feet in a year, every year. But if it's a nutrition issue or something, sometimes it's just a lack of water. If you could stick a 5-gallon bucket full of water with a little hole drilled in the bottom of the bucket, like a little pinhole, nail size, put a 5-gallon bucket, pour half a gallon of urine in it. You could throw some, you could even throw some milk in it. You could throw in Miracle Grow, a little bit of Epsom salts, manure tea, rotten comfrey or whatever, and let that drip down there so it's slowly feeding it. And every time that bucket empties, every day or two when it's emptied, you go and you fill it up again with some material. That'll make it grow like nothing else. Just a regular tiny trickle. Scott says, I spaced tomatoes at 18 inches but have densely fertile soil, but still need to fertilize every 2 weeks. Yeah, they're pigs. I did promise poke him in the eye today. You're right. Thank you. Bad Drivers of Columbus, Georgia says, what's your favorite homemade fertilizer? TFSW, compost, manure, etc. I like to garden without store-bought stuff, so I'd like to maximize fertility with stuff at home. The Dave's Fetid Swamp Water is my favorite because I can mix in such a wide variety of nutrition to it. I mean, I have thrown rotten milk in there, sauerkraut, brine, just all kinds of stuff. And I can also use it to soak my biochar. Easy. The milkman says, I second poke him in the eye. The milk cow always digs it. Carrie says, I live in Utah and I don't know what nitrogen crops grow here. Well, that's a good question. One of the ways to find out might be to call your forestry department. Chances are you're looking at more dry climate. There may be some, I'm not sure how cold it is where you are, but there are plenty of nitrogen fixing desert trees. Like I know a little further south, mesquites are everywhere. There are locusts. If you go even further south, there's like carob, but Jerusalem thorn. But Utah, I don't know how cold it gets. I don't know much about Utah's climate, but chances are there are almost certainly nitrogen fixing trees. You might call the forestry department and say, what nitrogen fixing trees grow in this area? Or just say, are there any leguminous trees? Any trees in the Fabaceae family? Find out what the pioneer trees are. Are there annoying pioneer species that show up when the ground gets broken? That's the sort of thing you want. Lauren says, what crop has surprised you the most in Alabama aside from the potatoes? Oh, that's a good question. I'm actually really surprised by how well my tomatoes are growing right now. I cannot believe that I have so many big, beautiful green tomatoes and nothing has killed those plants yet. I don't understand it. I have had so much trouble with tomatoes over the years. And to see so many tomatoes on there is just, it's beautiful, especially knowing how bad the soil was. I mean, my fall gardens, I was really fighting the soil. And doing the experiment was a big help because it kind of gave me the angle of attack. The other thing that surprised me was turnips. The turnips that we grew were delicious. I could not believe how delicious the turnips were. I mean, let's see, I got 94.5 pounds of turnips harvested in 2021. And those are the ones that came through the winter. And 121 pounds of daikons. No, I'm sorry. 12 pounds of daikons. I put that, the LBS, the L was a little closer. 12 pounds of daikon, 94 pounds of turnips. And, and a lot of those things I even just tilled under, the small ones. But I've been very surprised by how well the tomatoes are growing. And if they keep growing like this, I'm just going to love it. Andre, inner city gardening. Hey, Dave, remember me, the dog food and the garden guy? Yeah, man. It's nice to see you. Shannon says, were you saved before you got married? Yes. Both my wife and I. I became a Christian when I was 6 years old. When I was 6 is when I actually understood it enough. And prayed to be a believer, and my dad prayed with me, and at that point, I knew that I was a believer. So I never really had like a terrible dark past. I mean, I did go to art school, but I knew what I wanted in a marriage, and I wanted another believer. I wanted somebody that would, be hot, and no, I wanted I wanted a girl with great character who had never been around with any other guy. She's gonna be all mine, and who wanted to have a big family and be a stay-at-home wife and homestead, and like raise up a good crop of children. And I mean, Rachel was definitely a gift from God. Pheno Hunter says, you could thank Scott Head for my subscription. Well, thank you, Scott, and welcome, Pheno. Also, Puffin. We have a new member, Puffin. I've always liked Puffins. Welcome, Puffin. Now you can use the famous emoji. I'm also going to be posting the text pretty soon here to to the new version of Create Your Own Florida Food Forest. For those of you who are interested, I'm going to make that members only. You guys can read it and let me know what you think. See if you see any problems. Scott says, question. Oh my gosh. I gotta find. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Oh, it just flew off. I gotta find it. Son of a gun, man, it's just zipping along here. Opening song. Where are we? My goodness. Sorry, I'm going to try and go through these faster. Question, how do I plant a yam that I acquired, Dioscorea alata? In your clay soil, you're going to want to make a mound, loosen it up. If you can put a handful of dog food underneath it, that's even better. If you have some compost that you can mix in there, that would be really good. And just give it loose soil, because if you plant it flat into hard clay and you just punch a hole in and plant it, that thing won't grow well. They really don't seem to like that in clay. They can do that in sandy soil, but not in clay. So make a nice mound, like 16 inches tall. Plant it in the middle there, maybe a half an inch below the surface. Water it in real well. Put a handful of dog food in the middle of that mound if you have it. Bury a mouse under it, whatever. But they go crazy. Carrie says, I watched your video on composting. Now I have a compost bin and a compost tea going. Good work, Carrie. You're a good gardener. Hey, from Carsville, Virginia. How do I keep my chickens out of my gardens? I do not let them free range. My chickens live in a chicken prison. Actually, it's to protect them. It's for their own safety. Because there are rattlesnakes, owls, hawks, raccoons, possums, dogs, and bobcats, and apparently a panther here as well. So we can't let the chickens run. They will die. They will get killed. It's incredible. I mean, we had something dig underneath the pen already, and I had to go and dig wire in a foot deep around the whole pen. Something dug in the night and murdered one and shredded it. I was just glad it didn't kill all of them. So that's what I don't let my chickens free range. I love the concept of free range chickens is much better than the reality of it, where your gardens get all chewed up and there's poop all over your porch. AM says, just finished watching the last stream and saw this one. Zone 17, surface of Mercury. Zone 17, surface of Hoth. Oh my gosh. Carrie says, all your videos are very helpful. What's your favorite way to get rid of fetid bindweed? I love to tear that stuff out and stick it in a big barrel and let it rot down and then feed it to other plants for revenge. But the trick with that stuff is to not let it go to seed and get established. Every time you see it, you got to yank it, yank it, yank it, yank it. Zach says, what place, if any, does tobacco have in a garden? Bioaccumulator, pest control? I do. It's good for pest control. Also, the hummingbirds seem to love the flowers, so do the butterflies. And it's also great for the apocalypse when you have barter. Tobacco is traditionally, at least for the last 500 years or so, a very, very good barter substance. You can dry it and keep it for a long time, and it just gets better in flavor. So I always keep a little bit. I think every survival garden should have a little bit of tobacco in it at least, because the people that are like, gosh, man, I wish I had a smoke, will give you their stuff. In the apocalypse, you'll just rule the wasteland. At least that's the idea. Brett says, have you ever used alfalfa pellets in the garden? Considering using them in conjunction with all the wood chips, I'm layering to add some nitrogen to the mix. Yes, I've used alfalfa meal and alfalfa pellets. I think they're a good idea. I think they rot down nicely and they feed things long term. Alan says, how was your experience in Puerto Rico? I was only in Puerto Rico just one day. I was in Grenada, West Indies. It was interesting. I don't know if I want to get into it, though, because it wouldn't be all that politically correct how weird it got down there and everything, and I don't know how it would fly. But it was a fantastic experience in a lot of ways. And then the last bit under lockdown was not good at all. Things got really weird. But yeah, I mean, I could write an expatriation guide. Why I wouldn't do this again. Why it was awesome for this period of time and then it just wasn't. You know, you really realize when you're overseas how if you're not in your own tribe, you're really an alien. When things get tough, suddenly you just don't fit at all. Carrie says, do you think I could grow tropical trees in Utah Zone 6B? No, probably not unless you had a greenhouse. If you did a pit greenhouse, that would be a good way to do it. If you had a slope that faced south and you could dig a greenhouse into the side of it, use the thermal mass of the ground, you could do it. You could also put a greenhouse off of the side of your house and probably grow some things. Some things you could put in pots, but like tropical trees in the ground in 6B, probably not. I mean, that's a push even for me. You can usually push a zone to even 2 zones. But Drew says, can you plant dried papaya seeds? I've been seeing people on YouTube order a seed packet of papaya seeds to plant. You know, I usually plant them fresh, and they came up really fast and well that way, and I had planted some old ones, and they hadn't come up. There seems to be, I don't know, they will come up after the dry season down in the tropics. They'll come up from where they were scattered the previous year. So I do know they can dry and come back, and I've changed my mind on them not being viable. I just think they have to be kept well. Do I have any experience in braiding trees? No, I do not. It's a crying shame says, I accidentally killed a bird with my compost tea. I left it uncovered, only went outside and didn't see the bird get in there. Haven't made any sense. The bird makes for extra compost. Birds are very high in nitrogen. It is kind of sad though. I don't like to kill the birds. But I have thrown, like chicken bones in there. Let's see here. Working my way through. Totally covering the drowned mouse cartoon. That's awesome, Daniel. What key permaculture plants for Thailand? Well, man, bamboo. Bamboo has tons of uses. You can use it for biomass. You can use it for edible shoots. You can use it for construction. You can use it for stakes. You can use it for building structures. Definitely get a few varieties of bamboo. Absolutely bamboo. Also, coconut palms. Coconut palms are so useful. The fronds make a good weed block, also a good thatching. The coconuts themselves have multiple uses. The husks are really excellent for rotting down into compost, using for stretching potting soil, all kinds of things, of course, and they're a fantastic edible. I would also grow moringa, for sure, for a bioaccumulator, for nutrition, for protein, for chopping and dropping and feeding to the soil. And if you could get it, I would plant Tithonia diversifolia as a chop and drop plant to feed the ground as well. Another one I think is indispensable is bananas and plantains. You should definitely be growing those. You could chop the trunks up and use them on the ground to make pathways like Ernst Goetsch does down in Brazil. And also, like, you could chop a trunk in pieces and lay it on the ground next to young seedlings, and they will it basically slowly irrigates the ground as it rots. The leaves are also a really good weed block, plus you get food out of it. You get a dessert fruit as well as a starch if you cook them when they're green. Kyle says, we're trying sweet corn for the first time and all the ears have wormholes. Do we leave them alone? Ears still edible? Should I drown them all in 7? Yeah, the worms love that sweet corn, probably even more than you do. Usually people put a little bit of mineral oil on the end of each ear after they've tasseled out and made the thing. I've never bothered with that, but I don't usually grow sweet corn. I can't tell you the last time I grew sweet corn. Years. I always grow grain corn, and I grow varieties that have a really tight husk. Now, if it's a tight husk on it, often what happens is the worms will eat the first few rows. You just chop that end piece off, throw it to the chickens, throw it in the compost pile, whatever. The rest of the ear is totally fine. Sometimes, though, the worms will get in there and they'll chew all the way through the whole thing, and it's all over. By the time you see wormholes, it's basically too late. Even if you sevened it, it would probably be too late. You've got to head it off before they get there if you're going to do something. Marcus Aurelius says, how effective is foliar feeding, i.e. Neptune's harvest fish emulsion? It's pretty effective. You have to kind of do it regularly, though. Okay, cool, Kellen. Thank you. Boyd says, considering the current events, this is late. I just tilled a garden area. I have no transplants at all. Would you all try a garden this late or plant a cover crop? Well, you could plant You could plant okra. You could plant sweet potatoes. You can plant southern peas. Those are all good. Those will all get you food. It's late for a lot of stuff, but if you put in southern peas, you can at least harvest some peas. Plus, you'll improve the soil. Snake beans will also grow right now, and they'll grow quite well. They don't mind the heat. Let's see. Yeah, there's no need to post the question over and over again. I'll get it. Kellen says, any suggestions for Southern Arizona this time of year? I have no idea how to do seasons since Arizona doesn't seem to line up with anything else. Yeah, your seasons in Arizona are basically going to be, at least in Southern Arizona, late spring and fall. Or early to late spring and fall, and then the summer is probably going to be nothing. You could try doing the hot climate plants I just recommended. Snake beans, okra, southern peas. You're gonna have to keep them irrigated, and if you could do them in half shade, that would be a good idea. That's a lot of sun that you get there. I've been there, and the temperature swings are startling. Kyle says, I live here in Mobile. Hey, you're my neighbor, man. Tomato hornworm should have been here by now. I haven't seen a single one. They're plotting something. I haven't seen any either. And I'm wondering if it's because we had a long, cool spring. Are all Canna indicas edible? Yes, I have not heard of any inedible Cannas. I've eaten them. I've never, they're fine. I'm trying to get through here. Scott says, my terrible little dark past will make up for yours. Ha! It's like 100 in Arizona. David, have you ever grown cucamelons, Mexican sour cucumbers? Yes, I have, and they're not bad. Wow, are we spoiled to have you here again? Thank you, Fizzgig. Is it possible to make an acid hot compost pile using the pine needles for blueberries? Well, I don't know if you're going to get a real hot compost pile with pine needles because they don't like the heat that much. If you mixed them in with other stuff, they'd probably break down a bit, but they're slow composting. But, the blueberries don't mind compost. Compost tends to be pretty pH neutral, most anything you make it out of. But, you could try. Probably the green pine needles are more likely to compost faster than the dry ones. We don't talk about our school. Yeah, that's right. How do I keep ticks off while in the garden? I don't. I have never gotten ticks in the garden. But I had somebody when I was working at the Country Music Awards in Nashville. Somebody told me that they would take gaff tape and they would turn it inside out and they would put it on their socks so the sticky part was out, and they said the ticks couldn't go over it. Where do we sign up for your email list? If you go to any of my videos where it says download the free composting booklet, you get the free composting booklet and you sign up for the email at the same time. Did I ever grow chayote? Yes, I have. If you look up David the Good chayote, you'll find a couple of videos on it. I have a lot of trouble with it rotting in the ground, though. John says, thank you. I learned about it through following ancient Amazonian origins and archaeology. Love that you're trying it and inspiring others of us to try it also. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Hello, Floribama Homestead. Is there not a risk of herbicides in alfalfa? Yes, there is a risk of herbicides in alfalfa. However, the herbicides are not the aminopyrrolid ones that are going to wreck your garden. So if there are herbicides in the alfalfa, they obviously did not kill the alfalfa. And see, the problem with hay and straw is that the selective herbicides kill everything but hay and straw. With alfalfa, there's no herbicide like that I've known of. I've never had any problems with it, never heard of any problems with it. Thank you, Boyd. Have a good night. Liberty Singh says, Central Florida gardener here with an ant problem. I let a raised bed go unattended, and giant black ants, some with wings and some little white grubs, have dominated my little bed. Can I reuse this soil? Yeah. You know, if you have a raised bed and you water it and water it and water it, often the ants will just leave. You'll chase them away. You can reuse the soil, sure. I mean, you can also, if you want to get rid of them, you could pour boiling water into the nest. In Florida, because we have sand, you could pour boiling water in an anthill and it just goes shooting right through the middle of it. It steams and kills all the ants inside of it. So the little white grubs are the baby ants. But yeah, absolutely. It's no big deal. Lauren said, I think we've waited long enough for poke him in the eye. I'm trying to answer the questions. Lauren, man. Pressure, so much pressure. Would I recommend cheesecloth to protect grapes from birds? If so, when should vine be covered? I don't know about cheesecloth. You know, I have never netted them. They do make a bird netting. I would look for bird netting. Cheesecloth seems pretty tight. But maybe, I mean, anything is probably better than nothing. Scott says, question, first year blackberries getting started. What should I do to encourage fruit next year? Prune? Well, you can prune out any vines that have fruited this year and leave the vines that have grown this year. Or, here's another thing. If you're getting great big shoots, like at this time of year, you can chop them and they will branch. Sometimes you can cut and get your blackberries to branch and make more. But the best thing you can do is to feed them and water them and care for them really well this year. So this next year they're going to be awesome. Tesselia87 says, what causes banana suckers when parent is only 3 feet tall? They just happen when they happen. I've got one that's like a foot tall out in my garden. It's got a little baby next to it. They just do that. They're always sticking side things, you know. Hey, Karen. Nice to see you. And Ace, thank you for the super chat. Much appreciated. That is an awesome robot. Working my way down here. Karen. Karen is here in the house. Hey, Karen. Texas Farmer sends a $9.99 super chat. Thank you very much. Tip for the tips. I'm buying less bagged mulch thanks to you. Well, I am very glad. I have been planting this sorghum sedan grass, and I'm hoping that that's going to work out really well. That might be another option for all of us to grow. I've got a video coming on it. I don't have much to show yet, but it is growing. Carrie says, I have millions of grasshoppers on our land due to being unfarmed and unbuilt on. We are letting chickens out and weed and burn and mulch, but do you have any advice that can help us so we can grow a garden? I haven't dealt with them very often. Generally what happens is early in the year you start seeing the grasshoppers appear, and if you can head them off there, if you can spray them or stomp them or chase them or get the chickens out, they're not so huge later in the year, you know. But the chickens are a really good idea, especially if you have your garden with a chicken run between your garden and the prairie that's out there. Also, if you cut the grass, the prairie grass and stuff around your place or whatever wild grass there is, it will knock the populations down much because they don't have much food to eat. If you accidentally burned wood with lead paint on it and used the ashes in the garden, does that mean that particular bed is ruined forever? That's a good question. You can send in a sample and get it tested if you're worried about it. I don't know of any plants that necessarily accumulate lead. There may be one that'll pull it out for you. Hey, Rachel, good to see you. How moist soil could sweet potatoes handle? Well, they don't like to be soaking wet all the time. They need drainage. So if you're dealing with like very moist areas, I would make mounds and plant them into the mounds so the drainage goes in between the mounds, right? So you've got like rounded mounds or taller beds so the drainage goes out the paths. Zachary says, 3 chicks hatched yesterday. Now I'm broody, sitting and watching D to the G. God, it's great. Yes, thank you. That's funny. Nina says, David, what would you recommend for blueberries as natural fertilizer then? Coffee grounds, if you want natural fertilizer. They like coffee grounds. But regular compost is good too. If they're already growing in acid soil, that compost isn't going to hurt them, if you give them compost. But I like coffee grounds. I will pour coffee on them too if I have an old pot of coffee. How do I remove fire ants from my compost pile? Thanks. They're hard to get out of a compost pile. I mean, you could put Amdro near your compost pile and they will eat it and they'll die. But often fire ants are just part of composting. They're tearing it up and turning it over and they're a pain in the neck. But they're hard to get rid of. Peter says, how much manure does it take to make 30 pounds of black garlic, meaning dimensions of said manure pile? I have no idea what that means. Zachary says, my tortoise keeps eating my sweet potato vines and corn. Huh. When is my mixtape out? I don't know. Deanna says, how do I rid my garden of these nasty stink bugs? I'll tell you what. Stink bugs. If you have friends, lots of good friends, I recommend getting some little bowls of water. Put a drop of soap in the water to break that surface tension. And you and your friends all go for a walk. Then you knock, 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 knock those nasty stink bugs into the water. Yes, you knock, 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 knock all the stink bugs into the water. That's my recommendation. They'll drown. It's gonna take you a little while, but eventually they'll all be gone. Pigeon peas, what's best, direct sow or start in pots? I like to direct sow pigeon peas. I usually put like 3 in a station. 2 or 3. If you soak them overnight, the germination rate is better. But you could start them in pots and plant them out. I've done both. No death metal garden songs coming out. There's no death in my garden, man. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. Goodstream 180, Karen says. It's amazing that we've had this many. Yeah, it is amazing. Robert says, my kids love the Love Boogie song. I don't even remember it. What did I do? When did I do that one? Do I do Bokashi? No. I basically just ferment a bunch of stuff in my swamp water, but I haven't done that, so. Scott says, these live streams are worth their weight in 90% silver culls. I like that one there. So that's a 90% silver cull right there. Worn out. $50. I like to give those to my children sometimes. I'll buy a few here and there and give them to my kids so they hold on to value. When they grow up, they could be like, oh, this still holds its value, I'm not on the Clubhouse app. I don't actually know what that is. Anon says, do pigeon peas ever not be so floppy in the wind? If you space the pigeon peas farther apart and they grow up in the wind, they tend to be fine with it. Sometimes they blow over, but sometimes they'll grow good and thick and strong. Any good swamp plants? Oh, absolutely. Chinese water chestnut. Not to be confused with the water chestnut that's like spiky that everybody hates. Chinese water chestnut. It is a sedge. I also think that cattails are great. They have multiple uses. Elderberries like to live at the edge of a swamp. There are Nelumbo. Can't remember the full name of it. There is one that's it's basically it's an edible lotus. Those are good. Is it lutea? Lumbo lutea. I gotta remember that. It's been a while. And then of course there is the dreaded water hyacinth, which is one of the best compost plants you can have. If those happen to be in your swamp, you could scrape them out and throw them in the compost pile, throw them around plants. It's fantastic. Someone gave me a case of expired Starbucks turmeric coffee. I don't drink coffee, nor do I own a coffee maker. Can I just dump it in my compost? Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Kathleen says, if you were going to buy a couple of acres in southern Alabama or somewhere in Florida, what area would you choose best for growing stuff? In Florida, I would try to get near the coast or anywhere with a moderate climate. But I would also want to be away from the cities. I don't want to be near cities. I would like the freedom of being zoned agricultural. There's quite a few counties with lower population that are pretty good. Now you have to know that you may not fit in if you're not a if you're not a good redneck. If you're offended by the Confederate flag and that sort of thing, there's a lot of Florida that's definitely not for you. Somebody wrote me and said, my neighbors are flying the Confederate flag. I hate these people. And I'm like, you moved to Oklawaha. I mean, what do you expect? Wherever you move, you're going to have to fit into that culture. So, you have to know that. There's some, if you're towards the more liberal end of the spectrum, you'd probably go for someplace like the Gainesville area. But you wouldn't go to probably Oklawaha. You got to figure that out. And if the area, like soil-wise, if the area is like all pines and palmettos, and even the palmettos look yellow, that's a bad sign. That's not a good place to grow. If you see hardwoods like the live oaks and hickories, and they're green and healthy, and there's that soil is going to be good. So pay attention to the plant communities. If the plant communities are sparse and you see a lot of sugary sand, it's not the best. Now, there is sand that's decent, but you're going to have to look for it. Look for what's growing on it first. Southern Alabama, there are some very good soil areas. The area down in Daphne has great soil, and there's a lot of shopping and culture and all that stuff. Where I am further north there has absolutely terrible soil. And, the best culture we get is going to the feed store, which I like. Hello, Mexico. Arnolfo. You got a lot of good stuff you can grow there. Greystone's Garden says, hello, fellow gardeners all over the world. I'm from England. There's a mulberry bush growing in my garden in Sheffield because of D to the G. Fantastic. There is an excellent English tradition of growing mulberries. I'm glad that you are maintaining that. It's very good. Carrie says, is alkaline soil bad for a garden? No, not necessarily. There are plenty of things that grow in alkaline soil, and you can buffer it with compost. I don't know about black garlic, Peter. I really just have no idea. I've never even heard of it. Tina says, my mulberries are not as sweet this year as they were last. Any ideas? Sometimes rainfall can be a difference, and also nutrition. Higher nutrition, lower rainfall leads to sweet fruit, usually. You get extra water, and suddenly the flavor just kind of, it's not that great. Kang Kong is good in wet areas. Yeah, Lauren, that's a great one. Especially if you're in a tropical climate. Alan says, Sirhat just watched an old webinar. A guy said, drench the soil with a fresh tea and molasses. Bacteria will bloom. Fungi will feed on bacteria and make lead unavailable. So you basically make sweet tea. That's awesome. Brad says, you've inspired me to do terra preta. How's my terra preta bed going? It's going very well. Looks great. Christopher says, I'm growing water hyacinth, blank, 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 so fast, blank, blank, blankety blank. Yes, definitely. They are so fast. They said that they could double, an ideal climate, so they could double in population every 9 days. So it's almost like our homestead here with me and kids. Will you eat cowpeas in the sand? Will I am. Yes. Any tips for trying to establish a food forest on a Bermuda grass lawn and hard clay soil? Yes, sheet mulch. I mean, you really got to knock that Bermuda grass down. 2 layers. Put down 2 layers of cardboard and then stack up a foot of mulch. And start with islands. You're going to beat the Bermuda in pieces, bit by bit by bit, because you really have to have a lot to kill it. It took me in Tennessee, I had it, clay soil, Bermuda grass, and it took me a couple of years to knock it out in my garden area by deep mulching repeatedly. But 2 layers of cardboard did the trick. 1 layer was not enough. They were still coming through it. That stuff's a pain in the neck. Okay, cool, Kathleen. Then you would fit right in. Any of those counties, just, look for counties that are more agricultural and see how they voted in the last election and pick your favorites. That's what I would do. Lachlan, thank you very much for the super chat. Much appreciated. That's very generous of you. Thank you. How best to eradicate honeysuckle? It's choking everything out. Good question. I would probably chop it to the ground and mulch over it with, bit by bit. Just like you do with the Bermuda grass. Pam says, what kind of pawpaw should I grow in the Florida Panhandle? Well, you've got 2 options. Now, one of them is not easy to find, but I think Asamina parviflora is a good pawpaw. That one grows all through Florida. Down from about the middle of the state up to the north of Florida. Asamina parviflora. Asamina, I'm going to write it down for you. Asamina parviflora and Asamina triloba. Those are the true pawpaws. Now, if you're asking about papaya, the other pawpaw, I would grow dwarf varieties so you could cover them and keep them alive through the winter, because they produce fruit in about a year. Just about the time they're really loaded up with green fruit, the frosts come and kill them all. Let's see here. I'm almost getting through here. I'm catching up. Lovecat says if you put a chicken tractor on top of Bermuda long enough, they can knock it back. Yeah, they'll knock it out eventually, but it certainly takes time. And it loves to come back again and come back thick and green if you don't put it very long. Karen says, my future homestead will have a well. Will my plants encounter any issues with the minerals in the water? I imagine it will be better than my city water with chloramine. Yeah, it will be better. Generally, there's a lot of iron in that water. Sometimes there's manganese and other things, but there's often a lot of iron. If you have a potassium permangranate filter or something like that, it'll pull some of that stuff out. But I didn't have any trouble with it. It seemed to be mostly in inert forms. I guess the plants probably got lots of iron. You don't need too much iron. If people get too much iron, they literally are like rusty inside. I mean, it sounds crazy, but bloodletting was really not the worst idea in the world, because iron can build up in your blood and cause a decrease in your heart and circulatory function and some issues that can build up in your body unless you're bled. And if you eat a lot of extra iron, it can be a problem. Now, this is not my research. It's from P.D. Mangan. P.D. Mangan wrote a book called Dumping Iron, which I found fascinating. And you think, like, people were stupid to do bloodletting. Why would they do that? Like why would letting blood out be any kind of a good idea? Those people were stupid back then. No, they weren't. They weren't. Now, you can go too far with it and bleed to death, but it actually does rejuvenate the system to get rid of some of that iron, and also it rejuvenates your system to lose a little bit of blood and have to regenerate it. It cleans you out a little bit, which is kind of interesting. But so go give blood, folks. Huben says, all my graftings I tried this year failed. I tried whip and tongue method. Any suggestions and advice? Timing is really important, and the other thing is not having it dry out. Drying out is the primary thing that kills grafts. The other thing is just if it's too warm and it's gotten past the best time for temperate tree grafts, it doesn't do very well. Do I eat pole beans and bush beans like green beans, or do you remove the beans from the pod? If the pods get bigger and harder, often they're called shell beans. You would shell them out. If you pick them younger, usually you can eat them straight. I am going to call this thing, I'm going to sing the hamster song because we are over an hour now, and I want to get back out to my garden because it's getting cool outside. And if anybody has any more questions that have to be answered, leave me a super chat, and I will answer those, or you can catch me on the next stream because I got to get out to the garden before it gets dark. This song is called the hamster song, also known as Poke 'em in the Eyes. Little Susie don't like hamsters 'cause they sneak into a room at night. Got a pen under her pillow so she can poke 'em in the eye, poke 'em in the eye. Won't let the catch her sleeping, she'll be alert when the hamsters are creeping. Poke 'em in the eye, 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 poke 'em in the eye. Little Brian loves a hamster named Brian, gives him all his hugs and kisses. Sending out the hamster haters and the friends to sink or swim with the fishes. Well, snakes all smile and the lizards laugh. Brian the hamster's Johnny's little golden calf. So sing a song of picket fence, sing a song of pie. All my little homeboys poke 'em in the eye. Spin around the wheel, press your face up to the glass. Smile with your eyeballs as the pretty hamsters pass. I don't see a carving knife, but they got short tails. Poking eyes is a way of life, at least we are not snails. Well, Dick for slick is on a kicky lick, making some shtick over who flicked his bick. But he got nicked by Bisquick Dick, who always tricks dicks at a quick bit. I pick up sticks while they try to throw pies at the multicolored flies, wearing their itty bitty suits and ties. But the flies are quick and they know the trick. They poke 'em in the eye, 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 poke 'em in the eye. Spin around the wheel, press your face up to the glass. Smile with your eyeballs as the pretty hamsters pass. I don't see a carving knife, but they got short tails. Poking eyes is a way of life, at least we are not snails. Well, the hamsters I know are too cool for school. You know I take them swimming in my hamster swimming pool. So grab your sneakers, teach your hamster how to fly. And if it gets rowdy, just poke 'em in the eye. Poke 'em in the eye, 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 poke 'em in the eye. Ooh, 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 poke 'em in the eye. I wrote that song a long time ago. Long time ago. Tina, thank you very much for the Baphemus loaded super chat. Much appreciated. And Karen, Karen, thank you for the machete loaded super chat. That's hilarious. Tina, you're gonna throw in a whole bunch of these Baphoemii? Karen's gonna throw in a bunch of machetes. Next person's gonna throw in a bunch of nuclear bombs or chainsaws or something. So, I want to thank all of you guys for being here and for encouraging me to continue doing the good streams. I know a lot of you, particularly Alan, has been like, "When are you going to do it? Why don't you do the live stream again like you used to?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm trying to write. Because I'm trying to do other stuff like wander around aimlessly, staring off into space. You know, waiting for my STEMI check." But anyhow, thank you guys very much for the encouragement and peer-reviewed science. That's right. So you guys have a great night. I will try to do this again tomorrow. I have another video coming tomorrow too. I'm busy. Like I told you guys, I'm going to take this thing seriously. We are going to do more YouTube. So I'm very responsive to the public. Anyhow, have a great night, everybody. God bless. Catch you next time. And until then, may your thumbs always be green.